Okay, I haven't even set my lighting up or anything like that yet, but I want to make sure I film this and get this on camera. Look at this logo! This is the team we're talking about the whole time, the Hanshin Tigers. Who designed that logo? It looks like the tiger crapped his pants. Your sports logo's supposed to be like kind of regal or intimidating in some kind of way. Nobody's intimidated by a tiger that just crapped his pants. Watch, I'll fix it in 2 seconds. 3, 2, 1, boom. That was 4 seconds, I don't care. Took me 2 minutes in Photoshop. Whoever made that should be fired. Alright, roll the thing. From some of the greatest to some of the weirdest and everything in between, this is the Casual Fanatic. This week's episode, a secret blend of 11 herbs and curses. Welcome to the Casual Fanatic, the show for sports fanatics and casual fans alike. I'm Nick Nielsen, and today we're looking at one of the weirdest superstitions in all of sports. Now, if you've been a sports fan for a long time or a short amount of time, you would still know that fans and players alike can get pretty weird about superstitions, whether it's certain things you're not supposed to say during a game like shutout or a no-hitter as it's happening, or certain pregame rituals guys have, or even if it's a piece of clothing that you don't wash throughout the whole season. In fact, I can still remember my buddy Brendan. He had the pair of socks that he didn't wash all season long, and I remember watching him peel them apart and try to stick them on as the smell filled the... Anyways, the superstition we're talking about today is one of the weirdest ones I've ever heard about, and it starts in Japan back in 1985 in the Nippon Professional Baseball League. And keep in mind, there's a lot of Japanese names in this one. Probably going to get a few of them wrong. I'm just going to apologize in advance for that because it's going to be bad. Anyways, founded in 1950, the NPB is the highest level of baseball in Japan and arguably in the world outside of the United States. And a fair amount of players from that league have actually come to play ball in the major leagues. But some guys have even made their way west to play in Japan to try and re-energize their career. And that was the case for former Major League first baseman Randy Bass. Starting with the Minnesota Twins in 1977, he played 6 seasons in the major leagues with 5 different teams, his longest run being with the San Diego Padres from 1980 until 1982, but was never really a day-to-day guy in the lineup. What he did do very well was pinch hit, but again, not enough to make him a regular day-to-day guy in the lineup. So in 1983, 10 years into his career, Randy Bass headed west to Japan to join the Hanshin Tigers. And this was a great decision too when he moved to Japan. He hit 35 home runs in his very first year to take the batting title and did the same thing for the next 3 years. He had a Triple Crown win in 1983, but it's not until 1985 that we really want to talk about the Randy Bass story. He was 1 home run away from beating Sadaharu Oh's home run record, but Randy Bass in his last 2 games was playing against the Yomiuri Giants, who Sadaharu Oh happened to be the manager for. And O said walk Bass every single plate appearance. Bass didn't even get to swing at a pitch in his last 2 games because Sadaharu O wanted to keep his home run title. Yeah, that's some real soap opera stuff. And this is just a little bit of the reason why Randy Bass was so huge. He was not a superstar for the Hanshin Tigers, he was the superstar. They had been in the league since it founded in 1950, 35 years ago, and they were the only team to have never won a Japan Series title. So, when they had a last place finishing team a couple years ago, all of a sudden they're in first place in the league. Well, you can see why Randy Bass was such a big person to these guys. And this really set the stage for the 85 playoffs, but not really playoffs. They didn't really have a playoff format back in 1985. In fact, it doesn't come in until way later in the show, so stick around for that. But what they did have was 2 leagues similar to how the major leagues do, and the winner with the best regular season record at the top of each league at the end of the season would play a 7-game series against each other to determine who would win the Japan Series and be crowned the Nippon Professional Baseball League champions at the end of the year. This was only the 3rd time that the Hanshin Tigers were able to make it all the way to the Japan Series, and fans were pumped. Now, the Tigers had one heck of a season because Randy Bass was swinging the bats, but also they had a legend as their manager. That's right, a former team legend, Yoshio Yoshida, was in his second stint, but in his very first year of that second stint as manager, and led his team to 74 wins, 49 losses and 7 ties, their best record in 15 years, and they took the championship of their league, meaning they would head to the Japan series to see if they could become the NPB champions. And the best part about this, and I can't make this stuff up, is they were against their rivals, the Seibu Lions, who were the only team in the entire Nippon Professional Baseball League who actually had a better record. Now, as I mentioned, there wasn't really a playoff format. It was just the 2 top teams played against one another. So they had a 7-game series. The first 2 games would go to Hanshin, the next 3 would go to Seibu, and the final 2, if necessary, would go back to Hanshin. And this was a very, very, very close series. To start off the series, the Lions won the first 2 games on the road. The Tigers would win the next 3 on the road, meaning they had 2 chances to win a championship on home soil in front of their fans in Nishinomiya. Yeah, Nishinomiya. A lot of Japanese names, like I said. Anyways, to the action though, the Tigers played unreal. They put 4 runs on the board in the very first inning, and they did not look back on their way to a 9-3 victory, meaning they won the series 4-2 and got their first ever Japanese Professional Baseball League title in 35 years. And the man who brought him there, Randy Bass, was a god among men. This guy had 3 hits in the final Game 6 victory, one of which scored a run. He also scored a run of his own, and in the series itself, he had 3 home runs in the first 3 games of the series, easily cleaning up MVP honors. The first baseman was the man. And that's where things start to get weird. Now, Tigers fans are known for being the craziest fans in the NPB. It didn't matter how bad their team was, they showed up in droves each and every single game. So imagine how pumped these guys were to win their first ever series in 35 years. Fans were so excited they did something odd. What they went to was this nearby bridge called the Ibisu Bridge, not too far from Hanshin Stadium, and they decided to call out names of the players on the field. When they called a name of the player, one person who resembled that player would jump off the bridge into the Dotonbori Canal, which was very, very murky, dirty water. Now, in Japan, not a lot of bearded white dudes, apparently, so they didn't have anybody that really looked like Randy Bass. They needed some kind of surrogate, an effigy of sorts. So, what did they do? Exactly what you think they did. They went to a nearby KFC, which happened to have a plastic statue of the Colonel himself, Colonel Harlan Sanders, and they unbolted it, took it out to the Ibisu Bridge, put a jersey on it, and threw it into the water. And it disappeared into the murky depths of the Dotonbori Canal, and the curse of the Colonel began. Hope my neighbors don't hear that one. That might be a little weird. We go to 1986, the year the Tigers spend as the defending champs of the NPB. Yoshio Yoshida, still their manager. Randy Bass, still on the team. They don't even come close to the playoffs. They finished 3rd in the Central League, and then the next year, finish dead last. Now, because he led his team to a last place finish, Yoshio Yoshida, he got punted, and they brought in a new guy named, I have to look at it for this one, Minoru Murayama. And they finished last in the league once again. Now, things got worse. So much worse. Longtime Hanshin Tigers legend Masayuki Kakafu, aka Mr. Tigers because he's been a staple of the team for so long, he wanted to retire in 1988. At the same time, Randy Bass, the man who single-handedly turned this franchise around, wanted to go back to the United States. His son had a brain tumor, and he wanted to go back home and be there for proper care and be around his family a little bit more, which makes a lot of sense. Here's the problem. The Tigers had a new general manager by the name of Shingo Furuya, and the way things work in Japan is a little bit different than they do over in North America. You see, North American sports, it's usually like a former player or a former hockey executive or somebody who's been around the sports for a long time that becomes the general manager for a team. Japan, it's a little bit different. It'll just be any businessman that wants to be the general manager because they don't really have the same atmosphere around sports. So Furuya hadn't spent any time around the sport of baseball until he became the general manager of the Hanshin Tigers. And he was only the Tigers manager for 40 days. Why was Furuya only the manager for 40 days? It's pretty simple. Randy Bass, with him going back to the United States, Furuya denied the fact that Bass had the authorization to just leave the last 2 years of his contract. Randy Bass had made that deal before Furuya was the general manager, and provided video evidence that the Tigers were letting him leave so he could have his son treated back home in the United States. Furuya was so disgraced that the 56-year-old stepped out onto his hotel balcony and jumped, killing himself on July 19th, 1988. Yeah, that got dark real quick. So let's go back to talking baseball, shall we? The next 3 years were also bad for Tigers fans. They watched their team finish second last and then last again for the next 2 years. In 92, they tied for second in the Central League, but then again 95, 96, just a couple years later, dead last once again. And they had another 4-year stint in last from 1998 to 2001. In the 2000s, though, they did get a ray of hope. 2003 specifically, they made their second appearance in the Japan series after Hideki Irabu had come back from the major leagues and started killing things. He was a former Texas Ranger, and back with the Hanshin Tigers, he was playing well. There was pandemonium for the Hanshin Tigers fans. KFC outlets were literally bringing their statues inside so they didn't get stolen, or bolting them down with welding materials and stuff like that. It was crazy. Newspapers were writing articles saying the curse of Colonel Sanders is over. And this is where things get sad again. Back to the Ibisu Bridge, the site of the curse of the Colonel starting. 5,300 Tigers fans gathered on this bridge and jumped off, and somebody else died. A 24-year-old, I'm not even going to try and say his name because if I do, I'm probably going to say it wrong. He was pushed off the bridge when he wouldn't jump, and he fell into the waters of the Dotonbori Canal and passed away after drowning. Ah, man, I said we weren't going to get so dark again so quickly. What's happening here? Back to baseball, because that actually happened before the Tigers even played in the Japan series. They were looking pretty good. They were up against the Fukuoka Hawks, and they lost the first game 5-4, a real tough road game to start the series off before they got blown out in Game 2, 13-0. Back at home, though, the Tigers came back with 3 straight wins, all by 1 run, and they headed back to Fukuoka for Games 6 and 7. The Hawks would again take a big win, tying the series and setting the stage for Game 7. Win or lose, though, this would go down in history as one of the greatest Japan series ever played. By the end of the 3rd inning of Game 7, though, things were already over. The Hawks had a 5-0 lead, and they never looked back, taking it in Game 7, and Tigers fans, again, were left with nothing. In 2004, the Pacific League finally introduced a bit of a playoff series to the NPB called the Climax Series. What they would do is take the top 3 teams out of the Pacific League and have a bit of a playoff. Teams 2 and 3 would play a quick 5-game series to determine who would get to play the top team after the regular season, and they would play a 6-game series where the top team would get a game in hand no matter what. It's kind of like a best-of-7 series, except the first game automatically goes to the team who's at the top. 2 years after their finals appearance in 2003, the Tigers would again reach the pinnacle of Japanese baseball in 2005, but they'd fall short in 4 straight games to the Chiba Lotte Marines. No one dared jump off the small footbridge this time, whether it was fear of death, or fear of losing, or the fact that the Japan government actually did something and changed the bridge so it was a lot harder to jump off of. I don't know what stopped fans this time around, that's for you to decide. And since that #1 spot finish in 2005, Hanshin Tigers have never been back to the Japan series. They've had a lot of last place finishes, they've had a couple second place finishes, but they've never been able to make it back to the Japan series. Randy Bass's son, I'm not sure how his battle with cancer went, unfortunately, but I can tell you this much, things went pretty well for Randy Bass besides that. In 2005, he actually became a senator in the state of Oklahoma and was re-elected 3 times until early 2019, where he finally was beaten out and retired after that. As for the statue of the Colonel, well, that story, it's not actually over yet. It was lost for a long time, never again seen after 1985 until March 10th, 2009. They had reality shows where guys would try to go down diving to find this thing. It was a huge thing. Every once in a while it would come up in the news, but no one seemed to find anything until that fateful day in 2009 when a random diver in the Dotonbori Canal happened to find what he thought was at first a barrel, Then he got a little bit closer to it and thought it was actually a corpse, but you know what? Hanshin Tigers fans knew what it was immediately. They brought this thing out of the water, and it was the statue of Colonel Sanders, or at least part of it. Turns out they had just found the torso up. The statue had broken when it hit the water, so the next day they sent some more divers down, and guess what they found? The legs down. But the statue was not complete. There were still two things missing: the glasses and the left hand. And they say that the curse of the Colonel can never be broken until the statue is completed. The cool thing about this too is the statue itself, it didn't get returned to KFC. It's actually on display in the Hanshin Tigers Stadium, which is really cool, but they have some replacements for it, which I feel like is only making the curse worse, really. They have replacement glasses and a replacement left hand for what started the curse, which I find very, very odd, but who knows? One day they may complete that statue. Right now it's been 34 years since the Curse of the Colonel began. In fact, they're actually on their 35th season. And who knows? Maybe it's a numbers game, but I don't know. Relying on numbers for when you're going to win a championship or not, that seems like a stupid superstition or something like that. But as for the Curse of the Colonel, though, that is very real, and until the left hand and the glasses are returned, the curse may never be broken. And that is the story of the Curse of Colonel Sanders versus the Hanshin Tigers. Thank you so much for watching the initial episode of The Casual Fanatic. I'm looking forward to doing the next one again, hoping to make it a bi-weekly thing, but we'll have to see how the schedule works out. The next episode I plan on doing is looking at the weird, wonderful, and awesome world of fighting in hockey, the written rules, the unwritten rules, and just the kind of weird things that you don't normally see about it, and a little bit of a guide for those who are not big hockey fans, but they see all these hockey fights on the internet and go, oh, that's cool! Alright, so that's what the next episode's going to be on. Thank you so much for watching. I don't really have a way to sign off, so bye! Saw your mom on the kiss cam. Your mom from